Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.
Welcome to another episode of the ARC Advisory Group Smart Cities podcast. I'm Eddie Fidler, transport analyst here at ARC, and I'm thrilled to be joined by James Cater, program lead for EV infrastructure at Eversource. Welcome, James.
Hey, Eddie, how are you?
Great.
Good to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. Thanks for joining. So maybe we can just have you start by telling us about your background.
Yeah. So my background is a little bit circuitous in the way I got here. And so if you allow me just a moment, I started in finance, wanting to sort of end up being a portfolio manager at the end of the day. I consider what I'm in right now in the energy space career 2.0. And so 2007, 2008, when the bottom of the market fell out, I decided I didn't want to do the finance thing anymore. Cast a little bit, but really was always interested in finding how things worked. And energy is fundamental to how things work. And so got up with then NSTAR, now Eversource, the utility, and really got in at the ground level, trying to understand how things work about the energy efficiency space and leverage that into an opportunity with the city of Boston. We talk a little bit about smart cities. I'm sure we'll dig into a little bit more, but Boston being sort of a progressive space where they want to be a smarter and smart city. And then took that opportunity and sort of fell into this space where we are now, where we're standing up an EV infrastructure program, electric vehicle infrastructure program, throughout our electric service territory in Massachusetts. Just a note: Eversource is the largest energy delivery company in New England, representing some 4 million customers. We deliver gas, electric, and water now to those customers in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And so we are in a position to really have that conversation and influence around sort of how cities become smarter, how we engage in this space around strategic electrification. As we move forward and as we this whole space matures and becomes something. So,
yeah. Great. Well, I'm glad you went from finance to something really relevant to me. Well, that's great. So you mentioned the EV infrastructure program you've initiated.
Right.
Can you give us an intro to that?
Sure. So at a broad level, the state. We've been very, as I mentioned, we're in a very progressive state, right? Our state has been very sort of interested in advancing reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050.
Right.
And so within that are the various wedges and various areas by which you reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Mm-hmm. The three biggest ones over the past decade, 2 decades, right, have been electric generation, building use of greenhouse gas emissions, and transportation.
And transport.
We've done pretty good on the first two. Okay.
Right.
Reducing our emissions from electric generation, moving off of coal to preponderance of natural gas and nuclear, and with a increasing amount in renewables for our energy supply. We've done very well in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our built environment as well. Eversource has tremendous and robust energy efficiency programs. In fact, the state of Massachusetts and the city of Boston over multiple years have been the number one most energy efficient city and state, multiple years running.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with how robust and well targeted our energy efficiency programs are. And the utilities, us being one of them, that sort of administer those energy efficiency funds, have been very good at being able to move the market in energy efficiency. So both of those wedges have sort of decreased over time. So what that means is if you haven't affected this wedge around transportation, that transportation wedge sort of grows as a share of the pie.
Right.
And so now our state emissions, greenhouse gas emissions for transportation, are 43%.
Yeah, it's massive.
It's pretty significant. And so our regulators, our state has seen that. And if they want to get to 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, let's find a way to attack that wedge. And that's our target, right, at the end of the day. And so out of our own efforts to do grid modernization, sort of make the grid of tomorrow, the next generation, two-way power flow, being allowed to have more distributed generation on the grid, all of these things, we asked for and received the ability to deploy capital for the ability to do EV infrastructure, which is one of the barriers for our cities, our communities, our customers, our corporate customers, our residents to adopt EVs. That first cost of bringing power to the parking space, is expensive.
That's almost most of it.
That's most of
usually.
it. So what we've proposed is we will foot the cost for that. We will bring power to the space. Your cost as a customer is to pay for the charging station, install it onto the stub out that we leave, and then we pay for everything else. And then we own and maintain that infrastructure over the timeline of the program. And it's been super popular.
I wonder why.
Because we are literally performing or doing 50 to 95% of that cost of that full deployment.
Right.
We are footing that cost. And so if you think about how you advance EV adoption, right? One of the major things that prevents people from having their next car being an EV, beyond the things that we can control, which is sort of the cost of an EV, which is one thing, or, are there enough models of EVs that I can select from? That's the second one.
Right.
The third thing is range anxiety, which relates back to I can't charge this thing up anywhere, right?
Yeah.
If I'm on the road or I'm at my workplace, where do I charge?
Yep.
And so we think we're well positioned to attack that space, to lower range anxiety, get people to adopt EVs faster, to pull back that adoption curve, and thereby shrink that wedge. So that's a long way of saying we're being helpful to our regulators in terms of reducing that pie wedge.
Yeah, great. And it is kind of shocking to see just what proportion of emissions transport has become.
Yes.
Because it was always, greenhouse gases, power plants, right, for the longest time.
Exactly.
And it's like almost overnight, it's greenhouse gases, your cars and trucks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the other aspects of that as well is, of course, you have the greenhouse gas issue, but there's also local air pollution.
Yes.
So you might have these fossil fuel power plants, but they're in the middle of, maybe not the middle of nowhere around here, but they're a little bit farther from population centers.
Yes.
But your trucks and cars are driving right through cities and towns, emitting right into people's lungs.
Yes.
So this almost has that other, more personal dimension as well to reducing those kind of emissions.
No, you're right, Eddie, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's sort of the non-energy benefits of moving from sort of an emission vehicle to a non-emission vehicle, right? Your community becomes cleaner just by that action, and it also speaks to sort of a thing that we are very keen on as an energy company, which is this space around equity, right? So if we are interested in moving forward the adoption of EV, it needs to be done in a fashion that benefits everyone, right?
Because everyone's a ratepayer.
Because everybody's a ratepayer, and our DNA, and you're right, Eddie, our DNA is that we serve all ratepayers, and therefore all of our programs have to benefit all ratepayers. And so we are, advancing this idea that equity is very important in the space of EV adoption, EV infrastructure adoption, not just for the fact that we're moving to this electrification space, but because those communities are outsized affected by emissions. Those communities that are less able to deal with them are more affected by emissions outputs than those communities that are well off.
Right.
And so if we talk about non-energy benefits, those non-energy benefits are greater in those communities that sort of are in that environment we call environmental justice areas.
Yep.
And so that makes it important to particularly important to be able to make those programmatic dollars, make those programmatic features available to those communities.
Okay. So how are you doing that?
Yeah, so as part of the program, 10% of so it was a $45 million program that we're currently running.
Is that just for Mass?
And so that's for Massachusetts and Massachusetts Electric Service Territory, and Eversource is Massachusetts Electric Service Territory. 10% of that, 10% of those dollars are earmarked for so-called environmental justice communities.
Okay.
So $4.5 million plus or minus. That's just the low bar, right? That's our hurdle rate. We expect it to be higher than that. In addition, in those eligible communities, we will not just be paying for the infrastructure, but also paying for the station and the installation of the station.
Oh, okay.
So those organizations in those communities can take full advantage and get 100% payoff of that entire project.
Wow.
And then they just manage the soft costs, the maintenance of the station,
right,
and so forth. So you think about really lowering the bars, giving access. That's how we're sort of thinking about this. And another way, we're also working with a couple of nonprofits and some organizations around what does this space around transportation mean? How can we enable transportation in environmental justice communities? Because we also know that just putting in a charging station in an environmental justice community probably won't solve the issue.
And just walking away.
Away. In fact, there may be resentment from those residents or those communities when that happens, because then they say, well, I don't own an EV.
Right.
How do I
and they won't for a while. Yeah.
How do I access that program? So having conversations with local nonprofits, having conversations with ride-sharing companies about the opportunity to get people to have an EV experience by leveraging programmatic dollars may get us along that way. So you're working with ride-share companies. Is this to help folks that are ride-share and car-sharing companies?
Okay, so people who are working, say, for Lyft, to help them lease or rent an EV or
I would say so. So one of the companies we're working with is Green Spot. We have a couple of deployments in Newton, the city of Newton, with expansion to other communities. Not necessarily environmental justice communities right now, but we have sort of some thinking around that, wherein a person can do a long-term or short-term rental of an EV and go out and do their grocery shopping, go to their medical appointments. This type of thing is the type of experience we want people to start having, right? Have that EV experience without having to have the burden of purchasing an entire EV.
Okay, yeah. Just to feel the comfort of the car, the lack of emissions, convenience of charging mostly at home, but then as you need to on location.
Yes.
Okay.
And but to also get the sense of what the future looks like.
Mm-hmm.
You know what. If this thing is going to sort of move forward, everybody sort of has to experience this at the same time.
Right. And be kind of pushing in the same direction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then we're having sort of these light these beginning conversations around the micro e-mobility space, right? Scooters and bikes and so on and so forth.
Yeah, where do scooters and e-bikes play in?
Well, right now we just have our program, right? But wouldn't it be interesting potentially if co-located with our Make Ready program, you had maybe a space for e-bikes, e-bike sharing. Now that gives people the ability to access and experience an e-bike that they otherwise normally wouldn't.
Yep.
And now people are thinking about, okay, I couldn't do a bicycle because that's difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if I don't want to arrive to work sweating, completely full of sweat. But maybe I take an e-bike, I get pedal assist, and I arrive fresh to work, and I'm okay, and I can take that back.
Yeah. Almost becoming, instead of just a charging station or set of stations,
it becomes a mobility hub.
E-mobility hub, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, a local sort of super local e-mobility hub.
Exactly.
That's great.
That's
really cool.
We're and again, we're just at we're at the nascent stages of this in terms of stretching our arms out to other ways of mobility. Right now, it's the EV infrastructure,
right?
But we're putting power in the ground, and significant power in the ground. What other things can we enable in terms of e-mobility in those places?
Right.
And so we're having those conversations right now.
It's the foundation.
Exactly.
Right.
Once you bring the pipe in, now we have all these other opportunities.
Sure. Well, it's like the internet or the smartphone. No one could have guessed what entrepreneurs or NGOs would do with it, but the tools were there and the ecosystem blows up.
Exactly.
So hopefully we'll see something similar.
I mean, it's coming. It's coming.
And it's great that you're starting.
Probably see a couple things from us.
Well, we hope so. It's good that you're starting with those conversations in the community because, no one organization can know. Even Eversource can't know what's going to come or what even their role should be at this moment or in 5 years.
And you're right. And no one can. But you have the meta. You have the top, right? You know the future of mobility is probably going to be more electric.
Yeah.
You know that people are getting off of fossil fuels, going to electric and autonomy, sort of in parallel paths. But you see these sort of meta spaces, and you're like, okay, given that, what is the response function of a utility?
Yeah,
to bring more power to more spaces,
right.
And do it efficiently.
You have the super super high level and the super super immediate local.
Exactly.
And the whole middle is a interesting land.
Interesting space.
We're gonna traverse very soon. Awesome. So who can take advantage of this program? This is local restaurants, employers,
all of that. So this program is for non-residential customers.
Okay.
Currently, what that includes.
So I can't call in for this.
Not yet.
Darn.
There are other programs. We can dig into it later about what we're doing in terms of some of our demand management programs that come out of our energy efficiency space.
Okay.
We can talk a little bit about that. But this program, this EV infrastructure program, targets non-residential customers. So our workplaces, our large industrial customers, our retail locations, destination locations, our communities, our cities and towns. In fact, I would say that one of the largest, interested parties in our program have been our local communities. We've done over 24. So
at the city and town level.
At the city and town. So actual municipalities. For example, the city of Boston or the city of Newton or the city of Springfield, city of Pittsfield. These communities are saying, well, we are considered green communities. We should take advantage of these programmatic dollars to burnish our green credentials. We see residents telling our elected officials, hi, I bought a Tesla. Hi, I bought a Bolt. I need a place to charge up when I'm in the city center.
Yeah. So this is public, sort of municipally owned charging facilities.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what we want to target is sort of this publicly facing infrastructure, publicly facing charging station, right? In your communities, in your workplaces, retail locations. One of our biggest partners has been the Mass Audubon Society.
Okay.
In this, one of the great, and it synergizes well with their members. Their members' community, their location. So the Mass Audubon Society has dozens of sites in Massachusetts that are sanctuaries, where their members can go and drive in to the area. Maybe they have a picnic. Maybe they go and walk the trails out in the area.
Yeah.
And while they're there for a couple of hours. Why not have a charging station there? And they drive their car in, they get a good charge while they're doing the activities, whatever it be, trail walking, bird watching, and then they come back and now they have a good charge.
Yeah.
So that's when we talk about like sort of destination locations.
Right. And that just feels natural.
And that's natural,
that just
right?
feels natural. You don't drive into a sanctuary spitting gunk into the air and
exactly.
poisoning the birds, right?
Exactly. And so it's been a really good partnership, and we've done on quite a few sites.
That's
with
great.
them.
So how many sites in total so far?
So we've energized about approximately 100 sites already, and this program started in
when did this start?
2018.
Okay.
So we've done quite.
And those are completed.
Those are completed.
Okay. And how many?
And I will say that we have another 200 in the pipeline.
In the pipeline.
So we're this is really sort of taking off, right? People see the value in this program, see where things are going, and want to be a part of it. Yeah. And we're very happy to have that conversation with our customers. And it's really interesting how this has enabled us to do a couple of things. So we've become subject matter experts in this space relatively quickly.
Okay.
Having to be, because we are, and this is an offshoot, this has come out of our energy efficiency space, being a trusted energy advisor. Mm-hmm. Okay. So being that trusted energy advisor, how does a customer, how does an organization, a business, a city or town, how can we help them think about electric vehicle adoption? How can we help them think about EV infrastructure, and help them move forward in an objective fashion about what are the things that you really want to consider when you're taking this on, and being able to help, being able to demystify the process a little bit as well, saying, okay, yes, you have all these charging station vendors out here. Here are pretty much the things that you have to look at, right? When you're selecting a charging station. Here are the things you should think about for your tenants, for your employees, for your residents as they're going into these parking spaces. What does the parking regime look like? What does the fee regime look like? Yeah, all these other sort of.
There's a lot to it.
There's a lot to it.
There's a lot to it,
and there's a lot of education that needs to be done, and we are sort of doing that, being happy to be in that space to demystify that process. Now,
that's great.
The other piece around that is simultaneously we are introducing ourselves into this transportation space. So you think about, utilities have never really been in the conversation about transportation.
This is new
until the electrification item starts getting raised.
And, of course, but it's never been done.
It's never been done, right? Yeah. So this begets a number of different opportunities and different touch points that we didn't have before. Mm-hmm. With our transportation organizations, of course, we have very strict conversations with the MBTA, but maybe there's a further on conversation about, well, what if the MBTA starts thinking about electrifying their bus fleet as well? Their revenue and non-revenue vehicles, both the ones that both the buses and their other vehicles that they take from site to site. Mm-hmm. What conversation does this beget for the city of Boston, who's also trying to electrify their entire fleet over time?
The city fleet.
Right. And then where do they charge up at night? Mm-hmm. So we are being put into and having those additional touch points with our communities for the advancement as they think about their advancement in transportation, as they think about their transportation futures.
And that's exactly where it has to go.
Exactly.
That's where it has to go.
Because at the end of the day, grid operators need to have an insight, and it need to have that sort of ability to say, yes, this is what it looks like. This is where there's capacity. These are where the opportunities are to advance sort of this electrification transportation space. Mm-hmm. So we've been more than happy to have that conversation. In fact, with a number of cities and towns, because they're all sort of moving in the same direction at the same time.
Yep. Except with this veil of mysticism that hopefully you're able to
and that's part of the process, right? That's part of the demystifying process, right? And I can't emphasize this enough, that the market is still really nascent. When we started this, we had to do a lot in the way of building out the marketplace for EV manufacturers, sales teams, efforts out here. So what I'm saying is, outside of California, we're the biggest game in town. Mm-hmm. So if the concentration was very much in California, to a much lesser extent New York, for EV manufacturers, EV sales efforts, EV distribution, EV infrastructure distribution channels, there wasn't much concentration up here. We've done a lot to build that pipeline. Wow. To bring resources, bring attention to what we're doing here.
Okay. And they're starting to follow.
I
see.
So we talk about sort of building that ecosystem. I think that's been a sort of co-benefit of this program launch. I think that was to our regulators' credit, one of the intentions in doing this, sort of priming the market for this advancement of EV adoption.
Yeah. There's all these cool tertiary effects like that. Exactly. Or even you see these public-facing charging stations in your town and city.
Exactly.
Maybe you're not even using them, but in 2 years when your lease is up or it's time to buy a new vehicle, you've just seen the infrastructure. You're primed for it.
Right. That is one of the most powerful signaling devices for EV adoption. And I see the availability of charging stations.
Right. I passed it. I parked next to it.
Or it's at my workplace. So one of the things
I think that's a big one.
So what we've seen,
my car's sitting there for 8 hours.
Exactly. So what we've seen, and it's fascinating, right? In many of our deployments, many of our projects in employment space and workplaces, the uptick in EV adoption because we put in the stations.
Already.
So where there might have been 2 or 3 EVs, now there's 10.
And you're seeing this
we're seeing this real
less
time.
than 2 years.
We're seeing this in less than 2 years.
Wow.
And it's because people say, there's a place I can charge at. And then they start reading about it. They're like, oh, I can also put this in my house.
Yeah.
You know? And then I can get a gas station at my house, a so-called gas station at my house, a so-called gas station at my workplace, and then any place I've got in intertransit areas, and now I'm all set. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing that. We're seeing that happen live.
Yeah, it's also kind of funny just how important that is, given the fact that 90% of charging is done at home, and that we tend to drive 20 to 30 miles a day, which means you don't even have to install a level 2 in your garage. You can use a level 1 into your 110 volt into your wall socket and charge overnight. But the fact is, the 10% of the time, the 5%
that's the range
where
anxiety
you're around,
piece.
where you're somewhere outside of home,
right?
Well, you need those 5% too.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it really has a disproportionate effect, but that can make or break someone's decision.
Right.
So
right.
It has to be done, whether it's everything else aside. It just has to be done.
Right. That so we see 80 to 90% charging at home.
Yep.
But if you want people to adopt an EV, that last 20%, 10 to 20%, super important.
Mm-hmm. It's the make or break.
That's where people adopt.
Yeah.
Even though they will do the work at home. And that's sort of another piece of learning that we've done as part of this program. And as part of it, we've also sort of engaged some of our customers on that sort of home charging space. We know, even though customers can charge up their car at their residence, plugging into a 110 volt outlet, the plug you see in your garage or at in your wall socket, that plug, they can do that. They're spending 10 to 12 hours or more charging that car.
Oh yeah,
long time. So,
and even if you have the 10 hours, 12 hours, you get home at 6 p.m., you leave at 8, that's 14.
Yeah.
You hear the word 12 hours and you're like, that's silly. I'm never doing that. I don't have 14 hours to wait, even though you do it every single night.
Yeah, exactly. It's a funny thing.
Right.
It's a funny thing.
But it's the truth. We can laugh at it, but it's where human psychology plays into technology and industry and business and everything else.
Yep. So it's interesting that people moving sort of up the curve, those that are able, they are now putting in level 2 stations in their homes.
Right.
So
that's the standard now.
That's the standard now. So we think about the grid effects of folks getting level 2 station. That's another house.
Right.
When that car is plugged in.
Right.
So now you get multiple houses on a street. We think about that and say, okay, this is now an opportunity to lower demand. And so what are the opportunities with our residential customers to potentially give them the opportunity to take advantage of demand management programs that we have?
Great. Yeah, I was gonna pivot to this in a second. That's great.
Take advantage of demand program with their charging station at home. Maybe you don't charge from 6 to 6. Maybe you say, well, maybe you do charge from 6 to 6. Maybe we say, instead of charging on the weekend from 2 to 5 or 2 to 6, maybe we'll move you off of that and you can charge from 6 to 6 or 6 to 12. Mm-hmm. And so give you the benefit of not charging at peak time and charging it off peak time.
Right.
Thereby balancing the grid in a more reasonable fashion.
Mm-hmm. So how are you engaging with that so far?
So I think we're currently running a pilot with existing EV owners that have a level 2 charging at their home, mm-hmm. and sort of proving of the concept of what is the benefit, what is the grid benefit for customers who opt into a program where they say, okay, I don't want to charge at these hours, but I'll agree to charge at these hours instead, and then I'll get a discount because I am helping sort of smooth out these peaks, mm-hmm. These midday peaks. So we're advancing that right now in the residential space. We're also thinking about making that as part of the EV infrastructure program as well.
Right.
To have customers and companies be able to take advantage of that demand management space, mm-hmm. because they get high demand charges too in the middle of the day.
Right.
What is the opportunity to sort of trickle charge at the middle of the day, lower your peak, and thereby you're saving your company money, you're adding benefit to the grid as well.
Yeah.
You're doing all these things, and you're sort of being an active you're actively participating in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions on a minute by minute basis.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to use those sort of peaker plants that when sort of demand is high. You can shave off that peak, and you are taking advantage of that and getting the benefits of it.
And again, as a ratepayer, if there's less wear and tear on the grid, if the operation costs are lower, you're not an owner, but you are a ratepayer.
Yes.
And you pay for all of that.
Exactly.
So you're benefiting.
Exactly.
So you're seeing eventually EVs can be another grid asset. Their batteries are, the term now is virtual power plant, right? That's sort of the very long term.
Well, yeah, it's a very long term. It is a long term sort of opportunity. We don't necessarily right now have. I don't think the technology is proven just yet.
Right.
So this vehicle to grid, I think that's what you're talking about. The vehicle to grid space, or a two-way flow of power, giving benefit to customers to feed back into the grid
at high demand.
At high demand moments. I don't think we're there yet. But it's fascinating to think about. It's fascinating to think about, not only could you be a prosumer because you have solar on your roof, you have batteries in your house, you have a mobile battery that of some significant load that you could take from place to place to place, and that can help stabilize the grid.
Right. And you can choose to charge or use your appliances and everything else. And at beneficial times to everyone else.
Right. And so there's a number of things to sort of tackle around that, right? Sort of two-way flow of power.
There's a big number.
There's a question around OEM sort of allowing their cars to be able to cycle back into the grid.
There's a warranty issue.
There's warranty issues.
There's a business model change.
Exactly. But it's fascinating to think about. And I think at the end of the day, these things enable these sort of next questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They enable these more sort of really interesting new spaces in the transportation area. So
it'll be huge. And even though there are those hurdles of battery degradation from extra cycling and things like that, a lot of times the value to the grid of off cycling from your home storage or your vehicle storage is much higher than the tiny amount of wear and tear on the battery on the cycle. Not always,
right?
But there's plenty of those moments.
Yep, and the fact that you can now fill in those valleys or knock off those peaks because of you as a consumer or prosumer, that's empowering.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You now have the ability to make decisions and be able to be a part of this thing, and you know, Eversource is very much you know, thinking about being that clean energy catalyst, being in that space of being, you know, let's help our customers understand this space, and eventually maybe we get to, you know, these other sort of interesting questions.
Eventually we're gonna have to. That's the other part of it.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, eventually these things are going to come to fore.
Yeah.
To the forefront.
Absolutely. So that's the longer term vision on that end. But specifically for your current pilot, it's mostly manual, right? So you negotiate with your residents, your EV owners, that between X and Y hour, you'll have a certain rate if you're charging. Between these hours, another rate. And you plug or unplug and you make that decision manually. It's not automated by the stations yet or by software quite yet.
Not quite yet, but that's the thinking, right? That's the next step.
Yep.
Is maybe people download a schedule. Maybe you download a schedule to your charging station. A charging station knows when to take advantage of sort of these off-peak charges.
Yeah. And
not take advantage when peaks are drawing. Do that logic so that your sort of energy charging is optimized for your current trips, for your trips.
Right. For your schedule.
For your schedule, whatever that is. It's sort of like how a Nest thermostat learns.
Right.
So Nest thermostat learns your usage pattern when you're getting from home, when you're on the road, so on and so forth. When you're not at home, what if your charger could do the same thing?
Yeah.
Learn your travel patterns and say, they're going to be leaving at this time. I need to charge up here. Oh, and then by the way, I'm going to avoid this this point in time because this is a peak demand time.
Right.
And I can get a benefit if I don't charge here or if I trickle charge here and charge here.
And it can calculate in a way all of those benefits and disbenefits and
exactly
kind of keep you keep the headache out of your head,
exactly,
so to speak. And yeah, the smart charging concept, it is starting. I mean, some of these products are out there, but
yeah, I mean, it's part of the
sort of rudimentary.
Yeah, in the program, we only have we partner with ChargePoint on that program, because they sort of have that smart charging, those smart charging devices. Their home chargers are smart in that they can have the ability to be commanded to sort of trickle down.
Okay, and so are you interfacing with those yet, or is that the next step?
I think that's the next step.
To communicate live tariffs and everything else.
Exactly.
Okay,
that's the next.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That's going to be really exciting. So okay, maybe you can just. Well, we've talked about your longer term goals in these spaces. What are the barriers to getting there for you and sort of the broader ecosystem?
So I think if we think about sort of the barriers in front of it, one of the big ones is education, right?
Yep.
So we just talked about it a little bit. People are everywhere on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of their understanding of electric vehicles, their understanding of electric vehicle infrastructure, their understanding about how quickly or how slowly this adoption is going to happen, and their understanding about where they sit in that, because this is completely new. So this is one of those sea changes that's taking place, and people are going to have to make a decision sooner or later about how they sort of are part of it. So I think education is very much a barrier and an opportunity for us. Being able to use our existing sort of relationships as a jumping off point for that education of consumers, of residences of cities and towns, I think is valuable. But it's going to be it's a place where folks sort of need to understand, and so it takes a while.
Yeah.
For folks to come to understand this EV space, this electrification space.
Right. I mean, we've done things a certain way for
forever.
generations.
Ever since the Model T.
Absolutely.
Well, before the Model T.
Yeah, over 100 years. 120 now, 130.
And people have been very used to it, and it works.
Yeah, it's worked.
It's worked.
There's a few big externalities we didn't know about till recently, but for your average citizen too, it's also a lot to ask for your average person to get educated about all of this and change their entire mode of transportation and even ownership model eventually.
Right.
It's a big change.
It's a
big change. So people need credit for even trying.
Exactly.
But we should help them on the way.
Exactly. I'll also say that in terms of we talked a little bit about range anxiety being sort of this other barrier.
Yeah.
That where do I charge at? I think that there's a number of questions around, what happens to people in route, right? So from when they're driving from A to B for long trips, what do I do in the middle there?
Yeah.
And so that continues to be a barrier for EV adoption. DC fast is getting to a place where you can start thinking about much shorter charging times.
Yeah, almost on par with gassing up.
So you start reaching
approaches that eventually.
You start reaching what we call gas station equivalency experience, right?
Yeah.
You're there for a really short amount of time. That technology advances. I mean, when the program launched, we were talking about 50 kilowatt DC fast. Now people are talking about 350 kilowatt DC
or
fast.
More.
And more.
Yeah.
And so the OEMs are sort of lagging behind in that, so their capability to take that kind of charge. But this is advancing pretty quickly. I think we're going to hit a point where it starts making a lot of sense. There's still a very high first cost for that DC fast space. And so, but it's going to be necessary to really enable that curve that adoption curve to pull up.
Right, that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And there's also a major grid implication.
And there are
350 plus.
I mean, you have 350 plus
in one area.
Thank you, Eddie, for saying that. 350 plus, you can talk about 2-3 megawatts of load in one space. Mm-hmm. And that's significant.
That's serious.
And when we talk about sort of how Eversource looks at this, that's a grid impact. But how do we think about making that item, that location, potentially an opportunity? How do we have that conversation with potential businesses that are interested in deploying DC fast? How do we have that? How do we have that engagement? How do we support that?
What are the current thoughts on that?
Well, I think right now we're sort of we're getting our arms around that. We have some thinking around that, and I think it's going to be something that it is going to be much more, which is going to grow over time.
Yeah.
I mean, as part of the Make Ready program, we do offer incentives or that same incentive for DC fast. Of course, because of the EV program, the EV infrastructure program that we're running, the customer has to buy the charging station.
Sure.
So,
and of course,
that's
a DC
still,
is a lot more. Yeah.
And so that's still cost prohibitive. But we have had a number of conversations with organizations that are very interested in that DC fast space. Mm-hmm. We are helping enable other organizations like for example, we have an ongoing conversation with Electrify America, who is very interested in deploying a lot of DC fast infrastructure in Massachusetts and Connecticut. How we can potentially collaborate and work together, leverage some of our dollars and their dollars, and sort of extend our ability to do more deployments.
Sure, it's an ecosystem view.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we have a strategic relationship with Tesla because they've done a number of deployments of charging stations in our service territory.
Right. They have an extensive network.
They have a extensive network. We expect, I think the expectation is that more OEMs are going to start doing their own thing as well. So Ford has stood up and said, I don't know if you're aware of this, Ford has stood up and said, yeah, we're going to start doing this as well. GM in collaboration, I can't remember who they've been working with to sort of do that as well.
Yeah, the charging network space is its own beast.
It's its own thing. But all of those things touch the grid.
Of course.
And so we're having a conversation with each and every one of them. And you think about us being able to have a worldview about this. Who better to have it than us? Because all those places touch the grid. And we have insight into how each of those things is sort of having that effect.
Right. And all that is changing on the demand side as your supply side is changing with renewables and all those kind of things as well.
Which is why the electrification.
So it's really simple.
Yeah. Well, it's really simple. Super simple. All the time.
Trivial stuff. It's trivial stuff.
Well, we're talking about sort of electrification writ large, right? It's all of it.
Yeah.
It's transportation. It's also getting fossil fuels out of thermal load.
Yeah.
Sort of heating a building.
Right.
Okay. Well,
appliances.
Maybe appliances. Mm-hmm. It's all of this space. And if the future is electric, and we are, central to that. And we're more than happy to have those conversations with our customers.
Well, it's exciting.
And it's super exciting. I mean, so when I tell you a story, I talk to folks just friends of mine and folks just out there in the world, like, you work for a utility. Isn't that the most boring thing?
Oh, right.
The most boring place to work. And like, no.
Not today. Not in 2019.
Not today.
No.
We are it's fascinating how quickly we've moved in the past 10 years in terms of being nimble, being able to incorporate all of these things that are affecting and impacting the energy complex, whether it's offshore wind, energy efficiency, EVs. We're centered to all of that.
Yeah.
And I think we are willingly advancing this space. as a partner, as a utility, as a trusted energy advisor. So, yeah.
Well, that's great. It's super exciting. Again, glad you feel the same way and you're embracing all this as more of an opportunity than just as a threat and hiding your head in the sand. So
well, I think we have to, right? We are as the world we evolve with where things are going, and we have always been a partner to our customers and been a partner to our regulators and to our state, our local governments. That's how we want to be seen. So,
well, yeah. That's great. Well, I think that's about it. That pretty much goes through everything I wanted to rack your brain about while we have you today. So hey, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you,
James.
Eddie. I really
appreciated it. It was our pleasure.
Excellent. Well, look forward to continuing to advance sort of this clean energy space and this mobility space as well. A lot more to come.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, hey, thanks a lot, and we'll hopefully have you back.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.